Remote forests, silent rivers, peaceful campsites. In each of these wild places, something went wrong. From solo kayakers to unsuspecting tourists, these 6 true encounters with bears unravel in terrifying detail. Witness how a single misstep in bear country can turn a quiet moment into a brutal fight for survival. These aren't just attacks, they're nightmares in the wild. The morning mist clung low over the rugged terrain of the Kamchatka Peninsula as the tour bus rumbled along the narrow dirt road. 30 had arrived from around the world the day before, drawn by promises of close-up views of Russia's famed wildlife. Their guide, Oleg Vetrov, was a seasoned ranger in his 50s. He was rugged and quiet, known for his strict safety protocols and deep knowledge of the land. They were on foot, trekking along a shallow stream bordered by thick alderbrush and ancient pine. Several bears had already been spotted at a distance, lured by the early salmon run, but the massive grizzly near the bend of the stream caught everyone's breath. It was a male, likely over 900 pounds, digging its paws into the riverbed, lifting wriggling fish with practiced ease. Its coat was dark and matted, its muscles visible beneath its thick fur as it moved slowly, deliberately. Oleg motioned for the group to stop, whispering a sharp reminder to stay close and quiet. Cameras clicked, binoculars were raised, and everyone huddled behind a natural ridge about 60 yards from the bear, except for one. Emily Tran, a 24-year-old woman from Toronto, had joined the tour alone. Energetic and adventurous, she had been posting pictures since day one, leaning out over volcanic craters, crouched near bubbling hot springs, always chasing the perfect frame. Her excitement sometimes overrode caution, and today would be no different. As the group remained frozen in awe, Emily stepped away. At first, it was subtle, a few steps forward, crouching to get a better angle. Then she stood upright again, inching closer to the stream's edge, her phone raised in front of her. She was less than 40 yards from the bear now. Oleg hissed a warning, but she didn't hear or didn't care. The bear lifted its head. It had noticed her movement. Its dark eyes locked onto her, fish blood dripping from its muzzle. For a long second, it didn't move. Then Emily shifted her stance, holding the phone higher, trying to center the shot. The bear lunged. There was no roar, no growl, just raw, terrifying motion. The massive animal exploded forward, its muscles driving it across the ground with horrifying speed. Emily froze as the distance closed. Then she turned to run, but it was far too late. The bear barreled into her, knocking her sideways like a rag doll. She screamed a high, short cry before the bear swatted her down with a thunderous blow. The group erupted into chaos. People screamed, stumbled back, some falling to their knees or clutching one another. But no one moved to help. They couldn't. They were paralyzed by the horror unfolding in front of them. Oleg raised his rifle and fired into the air. The crack echoed through the trees, but the bear didn't flinch. It stood over Emily, now motionless on the ground, and began tearing at her with powerful jaws and clawed forelimbs. Her body jerked with each blow. The ground beneath her darkened quickly with blood. The tourists watched helplessly as the grizzly dug its teeth into her torso and dragged her a few feet closer to the stream. Her legs trailed limply, her head lolled to the side. The bear's face and chest were slick with blood now, its snarls muffled by the grisly work of chewing, tearing, devouring. Oleg screamed for everyone to back away, to get behind the ridge. A few obeyed. Some vomited. Others simply collapsed. One woman fainted and had to be carried back by 2 others. The sound of Emily's body being ripped apart was grotesquely vivid. Bones snapped. Flesh tore. The grizzly was relentless. Oleg fired 2 more shots into the air, then a third closer to the bear. Still, it continued, consumed by instinct, hunger, and bloodlust. Oleg didn't shoot directly at it. Not yet. That would only risk turning the bear toward the rest of them. He knew too well how fast that could happen. 10 agonizing minutes passed before the first ranger vehicle appeared at the trail's edge. The backup team, armed and yelling, finally spooked the bear. It raised its gore-soaked head, glanced once more at the ruined body at its feet, and then bounded back into the woods. Emily was unrecognizable. Her body was torn open from neck to waist, limbs twisted and shredded. Her face had been crushed. A few tourists wailed in disbelief. One man punched a tree and kept beating it until his hands bled. Another sat in the grass staring at the blood trail, muttering, The rangers cordoned off the area and ushered the group back to the vehicles. Paramedics arrived shortly after to tend to the traumatized tourists. No one spoke on the drive back. Even Oleg, usually a pillar of calm, was pale and shaking. He stared out the window, jaw clenched, fists tight. Emily's body was airlifted out. Authorities later confirmed she had died quickly, likely within the first minute. Her injuries were so severe that there was no real chance of survival once the bear made contact. The animal, later identified by its paw prints and fur samples left at the scene, was tracked down within 2 days and euthanized for public safety. There was outrage in some circles. Why kill a wild animal for doing what wild animals do? But the decision stood. The site was closed for the season, and the tour company suspended operations indefinitely. Oleg never guided another wildlife tour. He took a leave of absence and was last reported living quietly in Petropavlovsk, refusing interviews, haunted by what he had witnessed. The other tourists eventually returned to their home countries, but many carried deep scars. Some needed therapy. Some refused ever to set foot in the wilderness again. A few shared their stories anonymously online, warning others about the brutal reality of nature's unpredictability. And in the center of it all was a single moment. A raised phone, a step too far, a decision made in excitement, in ignorance, in defiance of warnings. It ended not just one life, but changed 30 more forever. The bay was still that morning, the sky overcast and low with clouds, the water like stretched glass. 35-year-old Lucas Delaney glided across the surface in a narrow sea kayak, his paddle dipping in rhythm. He was on day 6 of a 10-day solo expedition through remote inlets of southeastern Alaska, far from cell service, towns, or roads. As a wildlife photographer and seasoned backcountry paddler, Lucas trained for years for this trip. He had bear spray strapped to his vest, an emergency beacon in his dry bag, and every stroke of his paddle was measured and intentional. The shoreline to his right was dense with spruce and alder, dark and impenetrable. This was bear country. Grizzlies were everywhere along the coast during the salmon runs, and Lucas had spotted one that morning lumbering along the beach a few hundred yards ahead. It had glanced at him, then disappeared into the trees. He had marked the sighting on his map, gave the area a wide berth, and kept paddling. By late morning, Lucas had entered a narrow fjord flanked by jagged cliffs and fallen boulders. The tide shifted, exposing a rocky outcrop to his left, a good vantage point for photographing sea otters and eagles. He turned toward it, drifting slowly, camera slung across his chest. The thick and shadowed forest pressed close to the shoreline, but he didn't feel uneasy. He had done this dozens of times. The risk was always part of it. Then, without warning, the trees parted. A massive grizzly surged from the brush just 30 yards away, exploding into the open with terrifying speed. It wasn't ambling, it was charging. Lucas froze for half a second before instinct kicked in. He jammed his paddle deep into the water, pulling hard to reverse direction. But the bear was already thundering across the gravel, headed straight for him. He could hear its growls and the crunch of stones beneath its weight. The kayak rocked violently as Lucas twisted to escape, and in his panic, the narrow hull tipped too far. The world flipped. He hit the water hard, the shock of cold slamming his lungs into silence. He flailed, disoriented, trying to grab the boat as it rolled beside him. The bear didn't stop. It barreled into the shallows with no hesitation, water spraying around it. Lucas tried to scramble onto the overturned kayak, but the slick surface offered no grip. He turned, thrashing, as the bear reached him. It lunged. He felt its weight even through the water. One massive paw raked his back, and he was yanked beneath the surface, air bursting from his chest. The cold wrapped around him like a vice as the bear's claws tore through his wetsuit. He kicked wildly, surfacing just enough to gasp, before another paw smacked into his ribs, driving him back under. Blood clouded the water. Lucas twisted free and surfaced again, mouth open, lungs screaming. He tried to swim toward deeper water, but the bear stayed on him, splashing forward with frightening purpose. Its jaws snapped near his arm. He managed to kick its muzzle, buying a moment, just enough to lurch toward the wrecked kayak. His legs were going numb. One arm felt limp, useless, clawed open from shoulder to elbow. The bear growled again, the sound guttural and chilling. Lucas's eyes were wide with terror. He was alone, barely afloat, and the shoreline was no longer a place of safety. It was death. Then he heard it. The distant hum of an engine. Faint at first, but growing louder. A boat. He screamed or tried to, but his voice was hoarse and broken. He waved his good arm, splashing desperately. The bear paused, briefly distracted by the sound, standing chest deep in the water. Its head turned. The engine revved, and a small aluminum fishing skiff rounded the bend within seconds. The man at the helm saw the chaos and accelerated. As the boat closed in, the bear let out one last growl and backed away, returning to the shore in a slow, angry retreat. It disappeared into the trees just as the boat skidded to a stop beside Lucas. Strong hands pulled him aboard. His body was shaking uncontrollably. Blood soaked his wetsuit. He was barely conscious. The fisherman, an older local named Tom, radioed for help, then pressed towels to Lucas's wounds as they sped back toward a nearby lodge over 10 miles away. Lucas faded in and out during the ride. He remembered the cold, the pull of claws, and the heaviness of the bear's body. He remembered how slow everything felt underwater, how time stretched and twisted, and how close death had been. He wondered if the boat was real, or if his mind had conjured it in those final seconds. It took over an hour to reach the lodge. From there, a medical helicopter was called in. Lucas had lost a dangerous amount of blood. His back was torn open, ribs cracked, one lung partially collapsed, his arm filleted by the bear's claws. He spent the next week in the ICU. Wildlife officials later investigated the scene. Tracks matched a large male grizzly, likely foraging in the area. They found claw marks on the overturned kayak and blood in the shallows. The bear was not hunted down. There was no official pursuit. In this part of Alaska, people knew the rules. You entered their world at your own risk. Lucas survived, but the experience changed him. He never kayaked alone again. He kept the shredded wetsuit, now sealed in a plastic container, as a reminder of how fast the wilderness could turn. A year later, he returned to Alaska, this time with a more cautious and aware group. And every night since, in the quiet moments before sleep, he still felt the pull of water, the weight of the bear, and the breathless terror of knowing that something wild, something immense, had nearly taken his life, and almost succeeded. The early spring air was cool and crisp in a national park on the border of Tennessee and North Carolina, with scattered patches of snow clinging to the shaded forest floor. 10-year-old Lily Sanders had spent the day hiking with her parents and older brother, exploring short trails near their campsite off the Sugarlands Valley Nature Trail. The family, visiting from northern Georgia, had camped in national parks before, but this was their first time in the Smokies. The forest felt alive. Birds called overhead, and small animals darted between moss-covered logs and patches of dry leaves. Lily had always loved the outdoors. She was small for her age, curious, and never far from her father's side when they went hiking. But back at camp, as the family prepared for an early evening fire, she asked to help gather small branches and kindling. Her parents nodded, reminding her not to go far and to stay within sight of the tent. She grabbed a canvas sack and headed toward a nearby stretch of open woods, no more than 50 yards away. The light was fading slightly, casting long shadows between the trees. Lily wandered a little farther than she should have, distracted by a perfect bundle of dry sticks near the base of a fallen log. She bent down to collect them, unaware of dark eyes watching her from behind a thick patch of rhododendron. The black bear had been nearby for hours, moving cautiously through the area for food. Still groggy from hibernation, it was lean and hungry, drawn toward the faint smell of roasting hot dogs and cooking oil from campsites scattered through the trees. It had circled the Sanders camp twice that day, mostly hidden, sniffing at the site's edges and finding nothing of interest. But now, with the young girl alone and unaware, the bear saw opportunity. It happened without warning. The bear charged from behind the bush in an explosion of movement. Branches snapped and leaves flew as the 200-pound animal barreled forward, closing the distance in seconds. Lily heard the noise and turned, but she barely had time to stand before it collided with her, knocking her sideways into the dirt. She screamed, a piercing cry that echoed through the trees. The bear lunged, its weight pressing her down. Its jaws clamped onto her leg, teeth puncturing through her jeans and deep into her thigh. Lily writhed in agony, shrieking again as the bear shook her once, then tried to drag her back toward the brush. Back at the campsite, her parents froze. Then, panic-stricken, they bolted toward the scream, yelling her name. Her father grabbed a heavy branch, and her mother sprinted barefoot behind him. They reached the clearing in seconds. The sight stopped them cold. Their daughter was on the ground, her leg twisted unnaturally. The bear hunched over her. Blood stained her pants and pooled in the dirt beneath her. The bear's head lifted as the adults approached, its snout glistening with red. It hesitated. Lily's father charged, waving the branch, screaming at the top of his lungs. The bear growled and took a step back. Her mother picked up stones and hurled them, one hitting the bear's side. The animal, startled and wary of the sudden aggression, backed off a few steps, then turned and disappeared into the underbrush. They rushed to Lily, who was sobbing and clutching her leg. Her face was pale, smeared with dirt and tears. She was shaking uncontrollably, her breath short and ragged. Her father tore off his jacket and wrapped it around her thigh to stop the bleeding, while her mother called for help on their emergency radio. They were too far from the main roads for cell service. A ranger arrived within 20 minutes, followed by a search and rescue team. Lily was carried out on a stretcher to a trailhead a mile away, then airlifted to the nearest hospital. The puncture wounds were deep, but miraculously, no arteries were severed. She had lost blood, but she was conscious and alert by the time she reached the trauma center. Doctors worked quickly to clean the wounds, administer antibiotics, and assess for nerve damage. She would need physical therapy and possibly surgery, but she would survive. The attack sent shockwaves through the local community. Though black bear sightings were common in the Smokies, attacks were rare. Officials confirmed that the bear likely emerged from hibernation underweight and food-stressed. It had been seen the previous week rifling through garbage bins near a popular picnic area, a growing problem in the park. Rangers returned to the area to search for the bear but could not track it. They set up motion-activated cameras and reinforced patrols around nearby campsites. Though no further attacks occurred that week, the incident triggered a wave of warnings and increased safety measures across the park. Rangers began issuing bear-resistant containers to all campers, and firewood collecting was restricted to within eyesight of the site. Lily stayed in the hospital for over a week. She didn't speak much at first. The nightmares started 2 nights after the attack. Cold breath on her neck, claws scraping the ground, the unbearable pressure of teeth sinking into her leg. Her mother slept beside her, holding her hand through the worst. Her father sat at the window, staring out at the hills, reliving the moment he saw the bear over his daughter. She eventually returned home, walking with crutches and bandages, but slowly healing. Her story made local news, then national headlines. Wildlife experts used the incident to highlight the importance of never leaving children unattended, even for short tasks, and never underestimating black bears. Though smaller than grizzlies, they could be just as dangerous when food-stressed or provoked. Lily's family never camped in the Smokies again. The memory was too raw. The trail they once loved now held the echo of a scream and the shadow of something dark in the brush. And for Lily, the forest would never feel quite the same again. The Snake River rushed cold and fast beneath the early summer sun, swollen with snowmelt from the surrounding peaks. 20-year veteran backcountry guide Mitch Halgren led a group of 8 hikers across the waist-deep current just west of Moran, Wyoming. The Tetons loomed high in the distance, jagged and wild, while cottonwoods and dense fir trees crowded the riverbanks. Mitch had crossed this same stretch of river dozens of times. He knew the terrain, the weather patterns, and the wildlife. He also knew that the thick woods beyond the crossing often held surprises. They made it across without issue. Soaked but steady, the group gathered on the gravel bar, catching their breath. Mitch, 49 years old and powerfully built, checked the last hiker's footing before turning back to lead them toward higher ground. His rifle, slung across his back, hung slightly damp. He carried a heavy walking stick for balance and an old revolver in his chest holster, just in case. He took 3 steps up the bank, and the forest exploded. A grizzly bear burst from the trees not 20 yards ahead, massive and fast, all muscle and fury. Its ears were flattened, its eyes wild, and it moved with terrifying purpose. The bear had likely been resting behind the cover of dense willows, unaware of the approaching group, until they stepped into its space. Now it was reacting on instinct. Mitch shouted, but it was too late to warn anyone. He dropped his stick and reached for the rifle across his back, but his boots slipped on the wet stones. He stumbled sideways, falling hard. Before he could recover, The bear closed the gap. It struck him like a freight train. The impact knocked the wind from his lungs. He hit the ground hard, and his vision exploded into white. The bear's paw came down in a wide, savage arc, claws tearing into his shoulder and chest. He felt his ribs shift. Pain exploded through his body. The hikers screamed behind him, frozen in shock. The bear reared again. In blind desperation, Mitch rolled and grabbed for his walking stick, still half stuck in the stones. He swung it upward, just as the bear came down again. The stick struck the grizzly's face with a dull crack, redirecting the blow enough to spare his skull. The bear roared and staggered back a step, momentarily surprised. Mitch scrambled to his knees, clutching the blood-slicked stick like a weapon. His rifle lay out of reach, dropped near the river's edge. The bear lunged again, and Mitch jabbed the stick forward, striking its chest. It wasn't enough to stop it, but it bought him another second. The group had begun retreating, stumbling back into the water, too panicked to form a plan. Mitch shouted for them to go. Just go. But the sound came out ragged. Blood soaked the front of his shirt. The bear paced around him now, growling low, agitated and unpredictable. Its breathing was heavy. Its fur was matted and thick with spring mud. Mitch stood shakily, legs wide for balance, stick raised. The bear advanced again. Mitch struck at its muzzle. It flinched but didn't flee. He tried to back away, but the stones shifted underfoot. His legs trembled with pain. One eye was already swelling shut from the first blow. Behind him, the group was finally across the river, shouting for help on their radios and pulling out flares. A bright orange signal shot into the air. The bear flinched at the hiss but held its ground. Then, suddenly, something changed. The grizzly hesitated. Maybe it sensed the group's presence again, or the unnatural sound of the flare spooked it. Whatever the cause, the bear stopped its approach. It looked at Mitch, snorted, then backed off a few steps. Another flare crackled across the gravel bar. The grizzly growled once more, then turned and slowly disappeared into the trees. Mitch collapsed onto his side, breathing in short, ragged gasps. His shirt clung to him, soaked in blood. His arm hung uselessly, torn and mangled. His side throbbed with deep bruises and torn muscle, but he was alive. Two hikers ran across to reach him, kneeling beside him, trying to stop the bleeding. One wrapped a tourniquet around his arm while the other radioed their location again, repeating the coordinates. Mitch gritted his teeth through the pain, forcing himself to stay conscious. The cold river wind blew over him, and every second felt heavier than the last. An hour later, the whir of rotor blades echoed down the valley. A rescue helicopter descended into a nearby clearing. Medics rushed to him, stabilizing his wounds, fitting him with oxygen, and preparing him for transport. He was lifted onto a stretcher, blood-soaked and pale, but still alert. He was flown to Jackson, where surgeons worked for hours to repair the damage. He had deep lacerations along his chest and shoulder, several broken ribs, and extensive muscle damage in his right arm. They saved the limb, though it would take months of recovery before he could use it again. Wildlife officials confirmed later that the bear was a large female, likely defending a resting area near the river. No hunt was initiated. The location was temporarily closed, and warning signs were posted. Guides were advised to avoid river crossings in that stretch until late summer. The hikers never forgot the sight of Mitch standing bloodied and defiant, holding off the bear with nothing but a stick. He had likely saved their lives. Mitch, though quiet about it afterward, admitted later that it had been the closest he had ever come to dying in the wild, and he'd spent most of his life in places just like that. He returned to the Tetons a year later, not as a guide, but just to walk the riverbank again. The stones were still there, slick with snowmelt. The trees rustled with the wind, indifferent. Nature moved on, uncaring. But Mitch hadn't forgotten. He never would. The thick air of the Alaskan summer hung low over the dense spruce forest on Kodiak Island. The underbrush was wet from overnight fog, and each step through the tangled brush snapped twigs and rustled ferns. U.S. Ranger Daniel Kessler moved with quiet focus, his boots steady on the uneven ground. At 52, he was a seasoned ranger with decades of experience in the wild. Tall, broad-shouldered, and calm under pressure, he led a small research team deep into the island's interior, an area known for its population of massive Kodiak bears. The team, 4 biologists from Anchorage, was there to monitor bear activity in the region. part of a long-term behavioral study. Daniel had guided researchers through this terrain many times before. He carried a .375H and H Magnum rifle across his chest and a flare gun on his belt. Two of the researchers carried bear spray. They moved single file, speaking little, ears tuned to the ambient sounds of the forest. Raven calls, distant water, and the heavy silence that filled the spaces between. It was early afternoon when Daniel stopped. He raised his hand slightly, signaling the group to pause. Something was wrong. Beyond a screen of alder thickets, the underbrush shifted a few yards ahead. He heard it, deep, heavy breathing, too rhythmic to be the wind. Then came a low grunt. The researchers froze. From the far side of the thicket, a Kodiak bear emerged. It was enormous, easily over 1,200 pounds, its reddish-brown coat thick and matted, its shoulders rolling with muscle. Daniel had seen big bears before, but this one moved with a possessive energy, like it was guarding something. A kill, maybe, or it had been surprised. Neither situation boded well. He raised his rifle slowly. The bear didn't flinch, but its eyes locked onto him. For a moment, it didn't charge. The two stared at each other through the humid air. Then, without warning, the bear dropped its head and barreled forward, crashing through the thicket in a thunder of snapping branches. Daniel fired a warning shot into the sky, the crack echoing across the forest. The bear didn't stop. The group erupted into chaos. One researcher tripped backward, and another dropped their bag. Daniel tried to get another shot, but the bear closed the distance too fast. In a single bound, it slammed into him. He went down hard, rifle knocked from his hands. The bear struck him with a massive paw, its claws slicing deep across his chest. The impact rolled him onto his back. He raised his arms instinctively, trying to shield himself, but the bear came down with its full weight, its teeth finding flesh. The sound was wet, brutal. One of the researchers, Caroline Hughes, ripped the bear spray from her vest and charged forward. She sprayed directly into the bear's face, the can hissing loudly. The chemical cloud enveloped the bear's snout. The bear recoiled, shaking its head, snarling in confusion. It turned briefly, gave one last furious growl, and crashed into the woods. Daniel lay motionless, blood pooling beneath him. Caroline dropped to her knees beside him. His breathing was shallow, labored. Deep punctures covered his torso and neck. One leg was broken, twisted unnaturally. His hands were torn open from trying to fight off the animal. His eyes opened for a second, then closed. The rest of the team regrouped quickly. They activated their emergency beacon and radioed for help, screaming coordinates into the static. The nearest ranger station was more than an hour away by helicopter. The team cleared space near the trees for the aircraft and covered Daniel's body as best they could with jackets and packs. The minutes dragged on, each one colder than the last. Daniel's breathing slowed. His pulse faded. It was too late when the chopper appeared overhead, thudding low above the canopy. The medics confirmed what the team already knew. Daniel Kessler, career ranger, husband and father of two, had died in the line of duty. They loaded his body into the helicopter, blood still staining the moss. Caroline sat beside him, her clothes soaked, her hands shaking. She hadn't let go of the empty bear spray can. The bear was never found. The Forest Service conducted an investigation, combing the area for signs of the animal. They discovered torn foliage, fresh scat, and drag marks from what was likely a hidden food cache nearby, possibly a deer carcass. The conclusion was that the bear had been defending a food source, and the group had unintentionally crossed into its kill zone. No hunt was initiated. Following Alaska's wildlife protocol, it would not be pursued unless a bear continued to act aggressively toward humans or was confirmed to have stalked and attacked unprovoked. The wilderness had made its rules clear, and even Daniel, who had respected that truth every day of his life, would have likely agreed with the decision. His death shook the community. Fellow rangers, scientists, and park officials honored him in a memorial overlooking the valley where he died. The surviving researchers submitted their field notes and suspended the study for the season. Caroline never returned to Kodiak. Daniel's name was later added to the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial, not because he carried a badge, but because he stood between others and danger, deep in a place where nature answered to no man. His gear was recovered weeks later, his rifle bent and bloodstained, his radio cracked, and his hat still intact, resting beside the spruce roots where he'd last stood. The forest grew over the scene quickly. Moss covered the disturbed earth, and birds returned to the branches above. The bear was still out there, somewhere in the vast, wild silence of the island. It had acted not out of malice, but instinct. But those who had witnessed the attack would never forget the sound of charging paws or the sight of a man trying to make his final stand in defense of others. Somewhere beyond the thicket, the wilderness breathed again, untouched and unforgiving. When 58-year-old Tom Henley stepped into his backyard with a steaming cup of coffee, the morning mist still clung to the Asheville, North Carolina grass. It was early spring, and the trees beyond his property line were bursting with green. The chirping of birds mingled with the quiet hum of waking life. Tom had lived at the forest's edge for 20 years, and often said peace kept him there. Retired as a contractor, he spent his mornings in solitude, sipping coffee near his garden and watching the woods. That morning felt no different, until something moved at the edge of the tree line. At first, Tom thought it was a deer or maybe a raccoon, but as the form stepped into full view, he froze. A large black bear, nearly 300 pounds, ambled from the trees. Its dark coat glistened with dew, and its nose twitched as it sniffed the air near Tom's vegetable garden. Tom's heart rate quickened. He had seen bears, usually from a safe distance, lumbering across the hills or captured on his trail camera late at night. But this was different. The bear was too close, no more than 40 feet away. It wasn't just passing through, it was investigating. Tom stood still, breathing, watching the bear nose through the grass. The bear walked to the compost bin, nudged it, and then turned its head. Its small eyes locked on him. For a moment, neither moved. Tom slowly backed toward the porch, but curiosity tugged at him. It could turn around. He could get a better look. He stepped forward just a few feet, angling to peek around a garden post. The bear lowered its head and charged. Tom's stomach dropped. The sudden movement shocked him. He stumbled backward, nearly spilling his coffee. The bear moved fast, much faster than he expected. It tore across the lawn, claws digging into the earth, silent except for the thump of its paws. Tom reached the porch and grabbed the only thing in arm's reach. A rusty shovel leaned against the railing. He swung it in desperation as the bear lunged. The metal blade clanged off the animal's shoulder. It wasn't enough. The bear crashed into him full of weight, sending him sprawling into the grass. The impact knocked the wind from his lungs. His coffee mug shattered somewhere behind him. He barely got the shovel between himself and the bear as it clawed at his torso. The bear swatted it aside with ease. A heavy paw struck his chest, ripping through his flannel shirt and raking across his ribs. Pain shot through him. He rolled, trying to protect his face, feeling the bear's weight pressing down on his back. Instinct took over. He clawed at the ground, trying to crawl toward the garden shed. His left hand closed around something cold and smooth, the nozzle of a garden hose. He yanked it free, twisted the spigot beside him, and aimed blindly over his shoulder. A blast of water hit the bear square in the face. The reaction was instant. The bear recoiled, snarled, and violently shook its head. It backed up 2 steps, blinking rapidly, confused and disoriented by the sudden rush of water. Tom turned over, gasping, and sprayed again, hitting the bear's eyes and snout. The bear pawed at its face, then turned and trotted a few yards away, watching him from beside the fence line. Tom didn't wait. He scrambled to his feet, bloodied and limping, and rushed up the porch steps. He slammed the door shut behind him, locking it and collapsing against the frame. His chest heaved. His ribs screamed with pain. He dropped the hose and crawled toward the phone. The bear lingered in the yard for nearly 2 more minutes. It sniffed at the overturned compost bin, circled the area once, and finally slipped back into the woods. By the time paramedics arrived, Tom had wrapped a towel around his torso to slow the bleeding. His arms were scratched, and his back bore deep bruises where the bear had pinned him. At the hospital, doctors confirmed that he'd sustained multiple lacerations and cracked ribs, but no internal bleeding. He was lucky, they said, extremely lucky. Wildlife officers investigated the incident later that afternoon. They found fresh tracks in the mud, claw marks on the porch railing, and tufts of black fur near the garden fence. Tom described the bear in detail. Officers explained that with spring arriving early that year, black bears had emerged from hibernation unusually hungry and were increasingly venturing close to homes in search of food. The bear likely had been drawn by the scent of compost and vegetables, familiar signals that food might be nearby. The sudden encounter and Tom's movement toward it may have triggered an aggressive response, even if the bear hadn't intended a predatory attack. They issued public warnings and urged residents in the area to secure compost bins, clean up grills, and avoid approaching any bears. Tom's story spread quickly through the local community. He was shaken, but determined not to let fear keep him indoors. Still, he admitted he now kept a large canister of bear spray near the porch steps and had thrown the old shovel away. The bear was never found, and no traps were set. Wildlife officials believed it had returned to the deeper woods, likely more cautious after the encounter. Tom never stopped loving the forest's edge, but something in him had changed. The line between peace and danger had moved closer than he ever thought. He still stepped into his backyard each morning with coffee in hand, but before he sat down, he scanned the trees with more than curiosity. He looked for movement, he listened for silence, and always, just within reach, was the hose.